Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.13 tier list. Once again, I'm Dan Harrison. Just a reminder from last video, there has been some big changes to our tier list. We added an extra tier to better spread out the champions in our list, and we've updated the tier list page on our site. The tier list videos didn't change too much as we still only focus on champions from S, A and B, but you can head on over to mobalytics.gg to see the full list including C and D tiers. They're featured in a table at the bottom of the page. Now let's jump straight in. The top lane in the God tier we have Camille, Nasus and Jax. In S tier we have Fiora, Garen, Kled, Malphite, Ornn, Sett, Shen, Urgot, Wukong and Yorick. A big change in the top lane is the introduction of two new items, Anathema's Chains and Hullbreaker. They're supposed to be split push oriented items, and Hullbreaker definitely fits that role, so we'll talk about it first. Essentially the item gives you some solid stats, but you get some great resistances when there are no allied champions nearby, and you do extra damage to towers. The bonus is you also give nearby cannon minions a ton of extra resistances, and they can tank a crazy number of tower hits as a result, allowing you to shred towers freely. This item basically makes it really difficult to leave a split pusher unattended, and Riot introduced an answering item in Anathema's Chains. This item allows you to declare a nemesis, and over 1 minute you build up a permanent damage reduction from them, capping at 30%. At max stacks you also give them 20% reduced tenacity when near you. And this item probably actually isn't a great answer to split pushers. For the tanks who want to build this, they'll probably just be ignored by the split pushers as they target the tower. Things like Camille and Fiora also have true damage to mitigate the effectiveness of this item. That being said, it serves really well for tanks looking to use it on the enemy AD carry or major damage threats. Extending your CC and making them do even less damage to you has huge value, particularly for comps with less damage threats. On top of that, if you're someone who can actually contest the split push in a fight, say you're another split pusher yourself or just a strong skirmish or fighter, this item does have value in making it a more competitive matchup, although it won't work against true damage, so things like Camille and Fiora can just avoid that. Let's jump into how things have shifted up. Malphite has been doing better thanks to his buff, and is certainly someone who could build Anathema's Chains and make the enemy AD carry's existence pure hell. Riven got a slight nerf and was a tentative one at low elo. Her numbers are still pretty high considering how high the skill cap is, but we felt she wasn't quite as deserving of S tier anymore. We introduced Nocturne to the tier list, a popular top laner in pro play. He easily gets priority and is able to go toe to toe with a bunch of champions and skirmishes. Vayne was added as a fringe but viable side lane split push threat, as silver bolts render Anathema's Chains fairly irrelevant. Warwick is a pick that's been doing pretty well at lower ranks. His synergy with Divine Sundra is a big asset, and he's able to fight frequently and win out in longer trades thanks to his consistent damage and sustain. We also saw Stridebreaker change quite significantly. No longer having the dash has the potential to hurt champions, but the higher damage and slow may actually benefit some. Sett is likely the biggest one to suffer from this change, but his stats are currently insane and he'll still be a strong laner, just less capable of finding big engages in teamfights. On to our highlight picks. First up is Jax, and he's really enjoyed how strong Divine Sundra is. The magic and physical pen is great for him, and he's able to be a bulky but consistent threat in the side lane. With Hullbreaker, he can divert back into his old style of being a side lane threat who will destroy your turrets, and in the late game, a lot of threats can't really handle him. He does well in skirmishes, and the critical thing to look out for is finding backline access in teamfights. Landing a good counter strike and following up with your burst can easily pop a squishy target. In lane, you aren't at your strongest, but using your counter strike effectively can help you win into a range of auto attack based champions. You get a strong power spike at 3 and another at level 6 as your damage spikes significantly with your ult whether you use it or not. Often being able to utilize the extra damage, force your opponent to commit their ultimate, and then disengaging can be really powerful. Jax is also a solid answer to Camille, who is a champion who's been doing really well at lower ranks recently. Yorick had a brief moment in the sunlight, and although he's not as strong as he was a couple months ago, he seems to be in a really solid spot now. This mix of hybrid damage really benefits from Divine Sundra's split pen, and the items sync so well with him. Hullbreaker on top of that makes him a tower taking monster, and the enemy team will struggle to find someone to contest you. Look to play around your maiden, it's your biggest tool and can be the difference between you dying in a 1v1 to being able to potentially 1v2 or more. The lack of escape does mean you need to have vision of your opponent and respect being collapsed on, but when you do find windows, you're easily capable of slamming towers into the ground. Nasus has been a low elo stomper for a fair time and firmly sat in our god tier. These new items are absolutely something he can use to amplify that even more. Like our other two champions, he's great with Divine Sundra, and once you get rolling, you can invest into options like Hullbreaker, Frozen Heart, and plenty more to make you a hard target to kill and a threatening split pusher. Nasus takes towers like no one else, and the 20% bonus damage will make you crush them with high stacks. You are capable of joining teamfights though, and particularly into the popular melee skirmishes, your Wither combined with your huge amounts of sustain and damage make you a threatening target to deal with. Moving on to the jungle, in the god tier we have Xin Zhao, Shaco and Zac, and the S tier we have Amumu, Diana, Fiddlesticks, Master Yi, Nocturne, Rammus, Trundle, Volibear and Warwick. The jungle hasn't seen too much of a shift up. Nimbus Cloak being nerfed is a bit of a hit to slow the pace of junglers down, but to sort of change that affects such a wide range across the board, it won't make a massive individual difference. Wukong has been making some solid headway in the jungle, not quite as strong as top lane, but he's still got the same strengths in being a backline diving menace and causing a ton of disruption in teamfights. Olaf got some health, thanks to HP per level, and is particularly effective if you pair him with a Lulu solo lane to buff him up. Hecarim has also been on the rise, his nerfs to his tank build set him back substantially, but Divine Sundra is a great option for him, and his AD scaling has repeatedly been buffed to find him a place on our list. Rumble has essentially been removed from the jungle. There was a nerf to his WCD, and what you usually did with Rumble was spam it to build up heat so you could overheat on your first camp and shut it down. With this change, you can't actually generate heat by spamming your W, so he's really going to struggle to jungle. In honesty, he wasn't a great solo queue jungler regardless at lower ranks and had an atrocious win rate. When Rammus's ult was reworked, we saw a pretty hefty nerf to his kit to keep him in line. The balance team overdid it and have started to give him some power back, and he's now in a really strong position. He still is capable of the same typical frustrating Rammus play where he rolls into your AD carry, taunts them, and then demolishes them, but now with his ultimate he's more capable of finding a direct engage, particularly in team fights. In the early game, your ganking is really effective, but you can be caught out in a counter gank or against some of the strongest skirmishing junglers, so be cautious and track when they're moving. Going into the later stages, your job typically involves targeting the enemy AD carry, and you can even buy yourself Anathema's chain so they deal less damage and get CC'd for longer if the AD carry is the only major threat to you. Volibear is in a solid spot as a straightforward and powerful jungle bruiser. His ganks are good with his Q and E as solid setup to chase down a target, and with Divine Sundra you actually do a ton of damage while remaining tanky. Once again, the fact that he deals hybrid damage utilizes the mythic passive really well. With your ult, you can deal a huge amount of damage as it has a 250% bonus AD ratio, which you can quickly stack up with Sundra and items like Sterix. If you connect on one or multiple squishy targets, you can absolutely decimate them, and its function doubles to help you shut down towers when you're looking to dive. When playing volley, look to farm up to your level 3 as soon as possible, and then feel comfortable to contest scuttles or find some ganks. The skirmishing power is really good at 3, and you should be comfortable at challenging most opponents as long as you can connect with your Q and E. Trundle has made a big resurgence into the meta. He got a big buff to his pillar slow and is capable of building Divine Sundra and doing a fair bit of damage. Particularly with the nerfs to mobility in the current patch, his pillar is even more effective at trapping people and catching them off guard. On top of that, a range of melee skirmishing junglers actually struggle into him as his ability to reduce their attack damage while buffing his own makes him a formidable opponent. When playing Trundle, look to gank lanes without dashes ideally as your pillar is extra effective, and if possible look to close as much distance as you can before using pillar, as wait until they're flashed or dashed leaves them with no option to get past it, only around. Onto the mid lane. In the god tier we have Lux, Annie and Malzahar, and in the S tier we have Ahri, Anivia, Diana, Katarina, Rumble, Xerath, Yasuo, Yone and Ziggs. Mid lane saw a significant cost reduction to 3 mage mythics, Ludens, Everfrost and Liandry's. With these changes, mages in general will be looking a fair bit better and able to hit the power spikes sooner. Overall, it's hard to predict the exact changes that will come through from this, but there may well be a bigger shift than we initially anticipated. We did move Set down as his role as a stride breaker engage champ is more important in the mid lane compared to top, and the removal of the dash definitely hurts that. Reduction in mobility, cheaper cost mage mythic, these are perfect to set Anivia up to be really strong in the current patch. Champions without dashes struggle to break through a zone control, and hitting a spike sooner allows her to take control of mid lane and be unwilling to give it up. Anivia definitely does have a trickier time in the early stages of the game, but once she gets rolling she can be really hard to deal with, particularly for a lot of strong melee skirmishers which we see in the current meta. Once you get rolling, positioning is key, finding a good spot and then establishing control can be vital to coming out ahead in Baron and Dragon fights. One thing that really hurts Anivia players is flanks. You're great at stopping approaches from one direction, when it becomes multiple you'll get CC'd which interrupts your ult and you'll quickly get turned into scrambled eggs. Ziggs got some really solid buffs, and with reduced cost of mythics he looks to be in a great spot. First item Ludens does so much work for him as he's able to decimate waves and do a good amount of burst damage. Ziggs scales really well, and in the later stages his poke and burst damage are very hard to deal with. A good thing to practice with Ziggs is strong usage of your W. It's a great tool at getting you to safety, and when used against divers or assassins you can knock them away at the same time. Your minefield on your E is also great in choke points at denying access as a lot of champions take too much damage forcing through them and are forced to go around or wait for them to expire and their duration is really long. Ahri was already a strong mid lane pick, and the changes to Everfrost being cheaper simply means he's able to access the spikes sooner and have more power. With Ahri you should be looking to roam when possible and try and find picks. Your charm is a great source of CC, and with enough ability haste you can spam it pretty effectively. Similarly, your ult ends up with a low CD and can be used to find picks whenever there is a window, although of course you should save it when looking to contest things like Baron or Dragon if they're spawning shortly. One of Ahri's big strengths is her ability to shove waves with the Q. Look to utilize this to pressure your opponents so you can roam and assist the rest of your team. Onto the AD carries. In God tier, Ezreal, Ziggs and Kog'Maw, and in S tier, Ashe, Jhin, Misfortune, Sivir, Swain and Vayne. Not a huge amount of changes for AD carries specifically. The reduction in mage mythic cost will definitely help the mages we do see bot lane, but for the most part they aren't seen too frequently and haven't drastically changed in tier. Aphelios did get a decent buff, but he's typically underwhelming in solo queue and particularly at low ranks, so he's still in C tier and not shown here. Ezreal's success has grown massively over the last patch, and it's unlikely the nerf to ranged thunder autos will change that massively. The item is still really strong, and his full build is a big factor in why he's so powerful. Kog'Maw has risen drastically in popularity, and mostly people are utilizing his bruiser build where you end up significantly bulky and have a lot more survivability than typical for an AD carry. His damage output is insane, and you're easily capable of shredding multiple targets once you have Ruinans. In the laning phase, look to play around your W cooldown, and once it's available you'll outtrade most AD carries. Just be cautious about the enemy potentially engaging. Kog'Maw is of course paired really well with Lulu, but with this build you're far more self-sufficient, and so you're able to play with a wider range of supports and still remain relevant. He does struggle a bit into longer range comps, however, as you can only really trade with them while his W is available. Swain is a great skirmisher in the bot lane and really strong into melee champions and divers, an archetype which is really popular right now. Cheaper Liandry's greatly benefits Swain as it allows him to finish Zhonya's sooner as a second item and really amplify his team fighting. Your power in lane is a bit weak early, but at level 3 you can look to trade effectively, and at 6 your all-ins is insane with your ultimate. Ideally you want a support who can CC targets for your passive and lock them down so you can drain them with your ultimate. In teamfights you can do a lot of damage when in the mix, and against dive comps you fare better than a lot of AD carries as you're a really difficult target to kill, especially with Zhonya's. With Anathema's chains, Vayne is looking like a solid option who really just doesn't care about damage reduction. A lot of AD carries might be pretty concerned about the fact the enemy tank can just drastically reduce your damage. With Silver Bolt you aren't too bothered as the damage won't be reduced. Vayne struggles a bit with contesting lane priority, but she does well in all-ins, particularly if you can find a condemn. In fights later, your damage output becomes insane past 2 items, and it's a matter of finding windows to go aggressive and playing around your short range. Most teams will see Vayne as a target that needs to get shut down, so kiting and maneuvering is vital to keep yourself alive. For supports, in the God tier we have Zyra, Zillion and Leona, and in the S tier we have Brand, Janna, Lulu, Nami, Sona, Soraka and Xerath. Senna got a bump up due to a new Thundra build syncing so well with her, allowing her to be tanky and dish out solid damage. She would have reached S tier, but with the nerfs coming in, it will hit her a fair bit. Overall, not too many changes with support. The mage mythic cost reduction will help with champions like Zyra to hit their spike sooner, but it's unlikely to drastically change the current meta. Brand has been pretty high on our list for a while as a champ who has a good amount of threat in lane and scales really well as a support. With a cheaper mythic to pick up, he's going to be relevant even sooner and putting out crazy damage. He is vulnerable to dive threats, but often throwing down your ultimate before death is enough to make a big impact in teamfights as it bounces. In the laning phase, you can harass and poke effectively, but ideally you want to be able to find a stun and chain together your basic abilities to proc your passive and chunk a target out. Landing your stun is critical, so be sure to wait patiently for your opponent to use mobility if they engage, so you can look to turn the fight around. Xerath has been in a solid spot since his buffs, and with the cheaper Ludens option, he should be able to afford his items sooner on a support's budget and harass your opponents with damage. He's definitely a vulnerable to support, and heavy engaged champs can cause issues, so maintain your distance and look to harass them down before they get a chance. Your passive allows you to continue harassing as you restore your own mana, and once you've reset you can grab a lost chapter and look to spam even more. In the late stages, your ult is a great tool to utilize at chunking out critical targets. Ideally wait for your allies to land CC and you can hammer the target with huge amounts of damage with no opportunity for them to dodge. Jhin and Varus are both great lane partners who can set you up with their own CC. Soraka got another minor buff to Moonstone Renewer to increase her healing by an extra 1% per stack. She was already a great performer and scaled extremely well, and this just helps that even more. Soraka's obvious strength is to sustain, and with the new Warmog's change you can build it quite easily and have the passive activate, so it's a good option if you find yourself running low on health constantly. Her laning phase is really solid, the added sustain makes it really hard to poke you or your lane partner out as long as you're landing your Qs, and your E is an amazing tool on all-ins to deny your opponent and lock them up. The silence is really effective, especially against mobile champions like Akali, as the infinite dashes essentially become useless. And that's it for this patch. Hopefully this has been helpful in getting you up to speed on the meta. If you're interested in seeing the full low elo and high elo list in one place, including C and D tiers, then head on over to mobalytics.gg where you can get even more info including counters, builds, tips, combos and more. Everything's just been revamped, so be sure to check it out. See you next time and thanks for watching.